The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing contracts for my event planning business. Aunt Margaret's voice carried that particular tone she used when delivering bad news, wrapped in false concern. "Travis, honey, we need to talk about Jessica's wedding next month." My stomach dropped before she even continued. "We've decided it might be best if you don't attend. Sarah's going to be the maid of honor, and we just think it would be awkward with your history together. You understand, right? We're trying to avoid any potential drama on Jessica's special day." I stared at my office wall, processing the words that felt like a physical blow. Jessica and I had been close since childhood. When Derek Wellington broke her heart 2 years ago by cheating with multiple women, I was the one who drove 4 hours to console her, helped her move out of their shared apartment, and supported her through months of therapy. Now I was being excluded from her wedding because my ex-girlfriend might feel uncomfortable. Without another word to Aunt Margaret, I hung up and immediately opened my laptop. If my family wanted to exclude me from this milestone, I would make sure I was having the time of my life elsewhere. Within 2 hours, I had booked a 10-day Caribbean cruise departing 3 days before Jessica's wedding. The Royal Caribbean Symphony would take me to Cozumel, Jamaica, and the Bahamas. I emptied my vacation savings account without hesitation, figuring that if I was going to miss my cousin's wedding, I might as well do something memorable. The cruise departure from Fort Lauderdale couldn't have been more perfectly timed. As I stood on the ship's deck, watching the Florida coastline disappear, I posted a photo to Instagram with the caption, "Sometimes the best therapy is salt water and sunshine." Within minutes, comments started flooding in from friends asking about my sudden vacation. I kept my responses vague, simply mentioning I needed some time away. My stateroom was modest, but comfortable with a small balcony overlooking the ocean. I unpacked my clothes and settled into vacation mode, determined to enjoy every moment of this spontaneous getaway. The ship's activities coordinator, an energetic woman named Brenda from Ohio, immediately recruited me for trivia night and salsa dancing lessons. I threw myself into the cruise experience, making friends with other solo travelers and couples looking to have fun. On the second day, while lounging by the pool with a frozen margarita, I decided to check social media. The wedding was still 2 days away, but family members were already posting preparation photos. Aunt Margaret had shared pictures of the bridal shower, Uncle Robert posted shots of the rehearsal dinner venue, and my mom had uploaded images of her shopping for the perfect mother's outfit. Everyone looked happy and excited, completely unbothered by my absence. The wedding day arrived while I was docking in Cozumel. I had deliberately planned excursions to keep myself busy, booking a snorkeling trip to the Palancar Reef and a visit to the ancient Mayan ruins of San Gervasio. The underwater world provided the perfect distraction from whatever was happening back home in Ohio. Schools of tropical fish, vibrant coral formations, and crystal clear water made me forget about family drama entirely. But curiosity eventually got the better of me. That evening, as I sat at a beachside restaurant enjoying fresh ceviche and watching the sunset, I opened Instagram to see how the wedding had gone. The photos were already flooding my feed, and at first glance, everything looked picture perfect. Jessica looked radiant in her flowing white gown. The venue was decorated with white roses and fairy lights, and the bridal party looked elegant in their sage green dresses. Then, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Sarah was prominently featured as maid of honor, just as Aunt Margaret had mentioned. But standing beside her with his arm around her waist and a smug smile on his face was Derek Wellington. The same Derek who had shattered Jessica's heart, who had cheated on her repeatedly, who had left her crying in my car outside his apartment building when she caught him with another woman. I scrolled through more photos, my hands shaking slightly. Derek was in multiple shots, clearly attending as Sarah's plus one. He was laughing with Uncle Robert, dancing with Aunt Margaret, and even posing in formal family photos. The man who had emotionally destroyed my cousin was now being welcomed back into our family celebration because he was dating my ex-girlfriend. The realization hit me like a physical punch. My family had not excluded me to avoid drama between Sarah and me. They had excluded me to protect Sarah's new relationship with Derek. They had prioritized the comfort of the woman who had broken my heart and the man who had devastated Jessica over my presence at a major family milestone. I was expendable, but Derek Wellington was apparently welcome. I studied Jessica's face in the photos more carefully. Her smile looked forced and brittle around the edges. In several pictures, she appeared uncomfortable when Derek was nearby, her body language tense, and her eyes lacking the joy that should have characterized her wedding day. She was clearly trying to maintain composure and keep the peace, but I could see the strain. My new cruise friends, Mark and Linda from Wisconsin, noticed my mood shift during dinner. "Everything okay, Travis?" Linda asked gently. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I showed them a few photos explaining the situation, without going into too much detail. Mark whistled low. "That's brutal, man. They uninvited you, so the guy who hurt your cousin could come with his new girlfriend. That's not avoiding drama, that's creating it." Linda shook her head in disgust. "Family can be the most hurtful sometimes because they know exactly how to wound you. But you know what, you're here in paradise while they're dealing with whatever dysfunction they've created. Don't let their poor choices ruin your vacation." Their words provided some comfort, but the betrayal still stung deeply. As I walked along the beach later that evening, listening to the waves crash against the shore, I made a decision. I would not let this family dysfunction destroy my trip. I had paid good money for this cruise, and I was going to enjoy every moment of it. Whatever consequences came from their decision to exclude me while welcoming Derek was their problem to handle. The next morning, I woke up in my cruise cabin to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly. Still groggy from the previous night's entertainment, I checked the time, 6:30 in the morning. No one from my family had contacted me since Aunt Margaret's call uninviting me from the wedding, so the sudden flood of missed calls and text messages immediately put me on alert. The first text was from my mom. "Travis, please call immediately. Emergency with Jessica's wedding. We need you." My dad had sent, "Son, something terrible happened at the reception. The family is in crisis." Uncle Robert's message was more direct. "Travis, the wedding venue burned down. Everyone is safe, but we're facing financial disaster. Please call." But it was Jessica's text that made my stomach drop. "Travis, I know we treated you horribly, but please forgive us. We need help desperately. The venue caught fire, and we're liable for hundreds of thousands in damages. I'm so sorry about everything." I sat up in bed, my cruise ship gently swaying as it traveled toward our next port in Jamaica. Whatever had happened back in Ohio was clearly catastrophic. Despite my anger at being excluded, my concern for Jessica's well-being overrode my hurt feelings. I called her number immediately. "Travis." Jessica's voice was raw from crying, exhausted and desperate. "Thank God you answered. I didn't think you would after how we treated you." "What happened, Jess? Are you and Brandon okay?" "We're physically fine, but Travis, everything is ruined. The reception venue caught fire during dinner service. The whole east wing of the mansion went up in flames. All the wedding gifts, my dress, Grandma's antique jewelry that I borrowed for something old, everything Mom brought from her house for decorations. It's all gone." I could hear voices in the background, multiple family members talking frantically. The chaos was palpable, even through the phone. How did the fire start? The electrical system couldn't handle all the equipment. The DJ brought in extra amplifiers, the caterers had heating stations, the photographers lighting setup. It was just too much for the old wiring. The fire department said the mansion was built in 1922, and the electrical hadn't been properly updated. When everything was plugged in for the reception, it overloaded and sparked a fire. "But surely the venue's insurance will cover the damages?" Jessica's sob told me the answer before she spoke. "That's the nightmare, Travis. The venue's insurance policy has an exclusion clause for fires caused by temporary electrical installations. Since our vendors brought in the equipment that overloaded the system, we're being held liable for the damages. The east wing is completely destroyed, and the smoke and water damage affected the rest of the building too." "How much are we talking about?" $300,000. The venue owner is demanding immediate payment for restoration, and his lawyer is threatening to sue us personally if we don't pay within 30 days. Mom and Dad are liquidating their retirement accounts. Uncle Robert is taking out a second mortgage, and everyone is scrambling to raise money. I leaned back against my cabin headboard, processing the magnitude of the disaster. While I had been snorkeling in crystal-clear waters and enjoying gourmet meals on the cruise ship, my family was dealing with a financial catastrophe that could bankrupt multiple households. Where were you when the fire started? We had just finished the main course. Brandon and I were doing our rounds talking to guests at each table. Sarah and Derek were on the dance floor, actually. The fire started near the electrical panel in the catering area and spread so fast. The old wooden structure just went up like kindling. The fire department got there quickly, but by then, the damage was done. The irony was not lost on me. My family had excluded me to avoid drama, but they had ended up with a disaster that made any potential awkwardness from my presence seem trivial by comparison. What about Derek? Is he helping with the costs? There was a pause, and I could hear Jessica talking to someone else, her hand partially covering the phone. When she came back, her voice was smaller. Derek said, "This isn't his responsibility, since he was just a guest." He and Sarah left right after the fire department finished questioning everyone. Sarah said she had work early Monday morning and couldn't stay to help with the aftermath. Of course they did. Derek Wellington, who had been welcomed into our family celebration despite the pain he had caused, Jessica was nowhere to be found when real problems arose. And Sarah, my ex-girlfriend who had apparently convinced the family to exclude me, had prioritized her convenience over helping in a crisis. "Jess, I'm on a cruise ship heading to Jamaica. I won't be back for another week. But we'll figure something out, okay? The family doesn't deserve to be bankrupted over this." "Travis, I'm so sorry we excluded you. It was wrong and now karma has come back to bite us all." Sarah convinced Mom and Dad that having you there would cause problems, especially if you got drunk and made a scene about your breakup. We should have told her that wasn't our problem to manage. Wait, Sarah said I would get drunk and make a scene? When have I ever done anything like that? Never. That's what made it so unfair. But she was insistent, and Mom wanted to keep the peace with her, since she was putting so much work into being maid of honor. I should have stood up for you, but I was so stressed about wedding planning that I took the path of least resistance. I felt the familiar sting of betrayal, but now it was accompanied by clarity about what had really happened. Sarah had manipulated my family into excluding me by painting me as a potential troublemaker, despite knowing I had never behaved that way. She had convinced them that her comfort was more important than my presence at a major family milestone. Listen, Jess finished dealing with the immediate emergency stuff. Get documentation of everything for insurance and legal purposes. I'll be back next week, and we'll work on solutions then. Travis, there's something else. Mom mentioned you might be able to help financially. She said you inherited money from Grandma Rose last year. My blood turned cold. The inheritance from my grandmother was something I had confided to Sarah during our relationship, specifically asking her to keep it private, because I didn't want family members to start viewing me differently or asking for money. Clearly, she had shared that information with my parents, despite my explicit request for confidentiality. Sarah told them about the inheritance? I think so. Mom seemed to know the amount, which seemed weird, since you never mentioned it to any of us directly. $200,000. The money I had planned to use to expand my event planning business, maybe buy a small building for my office and storage space. Now my family was in crisis, and they knew I had the means to help them. The manipulation felt complete. Exclude me from the celebration, then expect me to pay for the disaster. But Jessica was family, and she was innocent in most of this. Despite the unfairness of the situation, I couldn't let her and Brandon start their marriage buried in debt because of a venue fire. We'll talk about everything when I get back, Jess. Focus on documenting everything and making sure everyone is safe. The money stuff can be sorted out. After hanging up, I sat on my cabin balcony, watching the ocean roll past. The contrast between my peaceful surroundings and the chaos back home felt surreal. I had been excluded from the wedding to avoid drama, only to miss being there when my family needed me most. Now they wanted my help, but only because they were desperate. My phone rang again. This time it was Uncle Robert calling from the venue, where he was apparently helping coordinate the cleanup efforts. Travis, I'm glad Jess reached you. This is a nightmare situation and we need all hands on deck to figure out solutions. What exactly needs to be done? Well, the venue owner wants $300,000 within 30 days, or he's filing suit against Jessica and Brandon personally. The insurance company is investigating, but they've already indicated they'll likely deny the claim based on the electrical exclusion. We need to raise money fast, and we need legal help to see if we have any recourse. And you think I should contribute because of Grandma's inheritance? There was a pause. Travis, I know this puts you in a difficult position, especially after the wedding invitation situation. But family takes care of family, and you're the only one in a position to really help right now. The expectation was clear. Despite being excluded when it was convenient, I was now expected to step up when they needed money. The emotional manipulation was textbook. Guilt about family loyalty, urgency about time constraints, and the implicit suggestion that my worth to the family was primarily financial. Uncle Robert, I'm on vacation until next week. When I get back, I'll look at the situation and see what can be done. But right now, I'm going to enjoy the rest of my cruise. Travis, we don't have time to wait. Every day that passes makes the legal situation worse. Then you should have thought about that before uninviting me to avoid drama. I'll help when I'm back. That's the best I can offer right now. I hung up before he could respond, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. My family had made their priorities clear when they excluded me from Jessica's wedding. Now, they would have to wait for my priorities when it came to helping them with their crisis. 2 days later, while enjoying a poolside lunch in Nassau, my phone rang with a conference call from multiple family members. I almost declined, but concern for Jessica made me answer. Travis. It was Aunt Margaret's voice, but I could hear several people in the background. We have everyone here. Your parents, Uncle Robert, Jessica, Brandon, and even your cousin Michael drove in from Cleveland. We need to talk. I'm in the middle of vacation. Can this wait until I get back? Son, the legal deadline is getting closer. Dad's voice joined the conversation. We've been to 3 lawyers this week, and they all say the same thing. Without significant payment to the venue owner, Jessica and Brandon could lose everything. Their credit will be ruined before they even start their marriage. Mom chimed in, her voice thick with emotion. Travis, honey, we know we handled the wedding invitation poorly. We were trying to keep peace and avoid conflict, but we ended up hurting you instead. We're deeply sorry for that. Travis, please. Jessica's voice was barely above a whisper. I made a terrible mistake excluding you. You've always been there for me, and I let other people's opinions matter more than our relationship. But now Brandon and I are facing financial ruin, and you're the only family member who might be able to help us. I took a deep breath, looking out at the turquoise waters of Nassau Harbor. A party boat was passing by filled with tourists, dancing to reggae music, living their best lives. The contrast with this family crisis call felt jarring. Exactly how much money are we talking about? Uncle Robert's voice became more animated. Well, the venue wants $300,000 for damages. The insurance investigation could take months, and even if they eventually pay something, it won't be immediate. We need to prevent the lawsuit and bankruptcy. And you want me to pay this because of the inheritance from Grandma Rose? There was an uncomfortable silence. Finally, Dad spoke carefully. Travis, we know you inherited a substantial amount last year. $200,000 could cover most of the damages, and the family could pool resources to cover the rest. I felt my anger spike. Not only had Sarah shared my private financial information, but my family had clearly been discussing my inheritance behind my back, calculating how they could access it for their own purposes. Who told you the exact amount of my inheritance? Another pause. Then Mom answered reluctantly. Sarah mentioned it when we were planning seating arrangements. She said you had mentioned being able to afford starting your own business now. Sarah shared information that I specifically asked her to keep confidential. Information that I shared with her during our relationship in private. Travis. Aunt Margaret interjected, I know you're upset about that, but right now we need to focus on Jessica's crisis. Family loyalty means helping each other through difficult times. Family loyalty. You excluded me from Jessica's wedding to protect Sarah's comfort. You prioritized the feelings of someone who broke my heart over my presence at a major family milestone. And now, you want to use my inheritance money to solve problems that happened at an event I wasn't even allowed to attend. The emotional manipulation was becoming more obvious with each exchange. Brandon, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. Travis, I understand your anger. And Jessica and I both know we don't deserve your help after how you were treated. But we're desperate. This debt would destroy our future before we even get started as a married couple. Brandon, I'm sympathetic to your situation. But let me ask you something. Where is Derek in all this? He was welcomed at your wedding as Sarah's date, despite the fact that he emotionally destroyed Jessica 2 years ago. Is he contributing to the recovery efforts? Another uncomfortable silence. Jessica finally answered. Derek said the fire wasn't his fault, and he's not responsible for damages from an event he just attended as a guest. And Sarah, she said her finances are tied up with Derek's real estate investments, and she can't access liquid cash right now. Of course, the people who had been prioritized over me at the wedding were conspicuously absent when it came to actually helping with the crisis. Derek, who had been welcomed back into the family, despite his past behavior, was taking no responsibility. And Sarah, who had orchestrated my exclusion, was claiming financial inability to help. Let me get this straight, I said, trying to keep my voice level. You excluded me from Jessica's wedding to keep Sarah comfortable. Sarah brought Derek as her date, despite him being the man who cheated on Jessica repeatedly. Now, there's a financial disaster. Derek claims no responsibility. Sarah claims no ability to help, and you want me to use my inheritance to solve the problem. Travis, Uncle Robert said firmly, this isn't about the past. This is about Jessica and Brandon's future. They're young, they're starting their lives together, and they could be destroyed financially through no fault of their own. Uncle Robert, they chose the venue. They hired the vendors. They planned the electrical setup. The fire may have been an accident, but the decisions that led to the fire were their choices. That's not fair, Jessica said through tears. We hired professionals. We trusted the venue. We did everything we were supposed to do. I felt my resolve weakening at the sound of Jessica's distress. Despite my anger at the family's treatment of me, I genuinely cared about her well-being. But I also recognized that helping them financially would set a precedent that my primary value to the family was monetary. Here's what I'll do, I said finally. When I get back from my cruise next week, I'll meet with all of you to discuss the situation. I'll review the legal documents, the insurance policies, and the venue contracts. If I decide to help financially, it will be under specific conditions that address how this family handles conflicts and decision-making going forward. What kind of conditions? Dad asked cautiously. We'll discuss that when I'm back. But understand this. If I provide money to solve this crisis, it won't be because you're my family and I'm obligated to help. It will be because I choose to help under terms that protect my interests and ensure this kind of exclusion doesn't happen again. Travis, Mom said, we promise we'll make this right. We'll do whatever you think is fair. We'll see. Right now, I'm going to finish my vacation. The cruise ends in 4 days, and I'll be back in Ohio by the weekend. We can meet then to discuss specifics. Thank you, Jessica whispered. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness or your help, but thank you for considering it. After hanging up, I sat by the pool for a long time processing the conversation. My family was facing genuine hardship, and my cousin's future was potentially at stake. But they had also made clear that they viewed me as a source of money more than a valued family member. Their desperation was real, but so was the pattern of excluding me when convenient and including me when they needed resources. A fellow cruise passenger, an older gentleman named Frank from Texas, sat down at the adjacent chair. We had chatted several times during the voyage, and he had a grandfatherly way of offering wisdom without being intrusive. "Rough phone call?" he asked gently. I gave him a brief overview of the situation, leaving out some of the more personal details. Frank listened thoughtfully, sipping his afternoon cocktail. "You know Travis. I've been married 45 years and raised 4 kids. One thing I've learned is that family crises reveal people's true priorities. The question isn't whether you can afford to help them financially. The question is whether helping them will actually solve the underlying problems that created this situation." "What do you mean?" "Well, it sounds like your family has a pattern of making decisions based on avoiding short-term conflict rather than doing what's right. They excluded you to avoid dealing with relationship drama, but that just created bigger drama later. If you bail them out financially without addressing that pattern, they'll likely repeat the same mistakes." Frank's words resonated with something I had been feeling, but couldn't articulate. My family's crisis was not just financial. It was the result of poor decision-making, conflict avoidance, and manipulation. Simply providing money would solve the immediate problem, but not the underlying dysfunction. "So what would you do?" Frank smiled. "I'd help, but only if they were willing to address the real issues. Money problems are usually symptoms of other problems. Communication issues, boundary problems, people not taking responsibility for their choices. Fix those problems, and the money problems become manageable." That evening, as I watched the sunset from the ship's deck, I began formulating a plan. I would help Jessica and the family, but not as a passive victim who was guilted into paying for their mistakes. I would help as someone who had something valuable to offer beyond just money. My professional expertise in event planning, my understanding of contracts and vendor relationships, and my willingness to hold people accountable for their choices. For the first time since receiving that initial phone call about being excluded from the wedding, I felt like I had some control over the situation. They needed my help, which gave me leverage to address the underlying problems that had created this crisis in the first place. The remaining 3 days of my cruise took on a different character, as I shifted from vacation mode to investigation mode. Instead of simply enjoying the sun and relaxation, I spent my time making phone calls and conducting research into the wedding venue fire. My years in event planning had given me extensive contacts in the hospitality industry, insurance sector, and legal field. If I was going to help my family, I wanted to understand exactly what had happened and whether there were any options they had overlooked. My first call was to Marcus Chen, a friend who worked as a claims investigator for a major insurance company. We had developed a professional relationship when I was planning a corporate event that had suffered storm damage, and Marcus had been helpful in navigating the claims process. "Marcus, I need some advice about a venue fire claim. My cousin's wedding reception venue burned down, and they're being told insurance won't cover it due to an electrical exclusion clause." "Those exclusions are tricky," Marcus replied. "Tell me more about the specifics." I explained what Jessica had told me about the overloaded electrical system and the venue's insurance policy. Marcus listened carefully, asking detailed questions about the timeline of events and the vendors involved. "Travis, this sounds suspicious to me. Venue owners are required to disclose electrical limitations to clients, especially for events involving multiple vendors with power requirements. If the venue knew their electrical system couldn't handle a typical wedding setup, but failed to warn your cousin, that could constitute negligence that overrides the exclusion clause. What kind of documentation would prove something like that? You'd need the original venue contract, any correspondence about electrical requirements, and ideally, some evidence that the venue had prior knowledge of electrical problems. Also, if other events at that venue have experienced similar issues that would be relevant." This gave me my first line of investigation. I called Jessica back and asked her to email me copies of all venue contracts, vendor agreements, and any correspondence with the venue owner about setup requirements. She sent the documents within hours, clearly desperate for any help I could provide. Reading through the paperwork while sitting on my cabin balcony, I noticed several concerning details. The venue contract included standard language about client responsibility for vendor electrical needs, but provided no specific guidance about electrical capacity or limitations. The invoice for the DJ services showed they had specifically asked about power requirements and been told the venue could accommodate standard event equipment. My next call was to a friend who worked in venue management in Columbus. Rachel had been in the hospitality industry for over 15 years and knew the regulatory requirements for event venues. Rachel, what are venue owners required to disclose about electrical capacity for wedding receptions? Travis, that's a great question. Since the venue fire in Pittsburgh 3 years ago that killed 2 people, Ohio has strict disclosure requirements. Venues built before 1950 have to provide written electrical capacity documentation to clients planning events with multiple vendors. If they don't provide that documentation, they can be held liable for any damages resulting from electrical failures. What if the venue was built in 1922? Then, they definitely should have provided electrical specifications. Do you have copies of what the venue gave your cousin? I reviewed Jessica's documents again. There was no electrical capacity documentation anywhere in the paperwork. The venue had apparently failed to meet Ohio's legal disclosure requirements, which could potentially void their insurance exclusion clause. But my most revealing conversation came when I called Tony Rodriguez, a private investigator I had worked with during a corporate event where we suspected vendor fraud. Tony specialized in insurance investigations and had connections throughout the legal community. Tony, I need some background research on a venue fire. Can you run a quick check on prior incidents at this location? I gave him the venue name and address. Tony called me back within 2 hours with information that made my blood run cold. Travis, this venue has had 2 other electrical incidents in the past 18 months. One was a minor kitchen fire during a corporate event, and another was a power failure that shut down a wedding reception last fall. Both incidents were reported to the fire department, and the venue was cited for electrical code violations after each incident. Were those citations resolved? That's the interesting part. The venue owner paid fines, but never actually upgraded the electrical system. The fire marshal's office has an open file on this property recommending major electrical renovations, but the owner kept postponing the work. This was explosive information. The venue owner knew about electrical problems, had been officially cited for violations, but continued hosting events without making necessary safety improvements. This wasn't an accident. It was negligent endangerment that had predictably resulted in a major fire. Tony, there's something else I need you to check. The maid of honor at this wedding was dating a man named Derek Wellington. He's a real estate developer who previously dated the bride. Can you find out if Derek has any connection to this venue or its insurance company? Give me Derek's full name, and I'll see what I can dig up. While waiting for Tony's research, I made one more call that would prove to be crucial. I contacted Lisa Park, a lawyer who specialized in insurance fraud and had helped me with a case involving a vendor who was double billing clients. Lisa, hypothetically, if someone deliberately chose a venue knowing it had electrical problems, hoping to collect insurance money from a predictable fire, what would that constitute legally? Travis, that would be insurance fraud, criminal conspiracy, and potentially reckless endangerment. It's a serious felony. Why are you asking? I explained the situation without mentioning specific names. Lisa's response was immediate and concerned. If someone orchestrated this scenario, they're looking at major prison time. But proving intent would require evidence of prior knowledge, communication with insurance companies, and possibly recorded conversations about the plan. What if they had consulted with lawyers about insurance claims before the incident? That would be strong evidence of premeditation. Travis, if you suspect something like this, you need to contact law enforcement immediately. Tony called back the next morning with information that confirmed my worst suspicions. Derek Wellington had purchased 3 properties in the past 2 years that had subsequently suffered insurance claim events: a restaurant kitchen fire, a retail space flood, and a rental property break-in. In each case, Derek had collected significant insurance settlements. More damning, Tony's investigation revealed that Sarah had made multiple phone calls to personal injury lawyers in the weeks before Jessica's wedding. Phone records showed consultations with 3 different law firms that specialized in venue liability and insurance claims. The final piece of evidence came from social media research. Derek had posted photos from the wedding venue during the planning phase, including pictures of the electrical panel area where the fire had started. His construction background would have given him knowledge to recognize the outdated and dangerous electrical setup. I spent my final day on the cruise documenting everything Tony had discovered and creating a timeline of Derek and Sarah's activities leading up to the wedding. The evidence strongly suggested they had deliberately chosen the faulty venue, knowing about its electrical problems, planning to blame the venue for a predictable fire, and collect damages while leaving my family to bear the immediate costs. The realization that my family had excluded me to protect people who were planning to defraud them added another layer of betrayal to an already painful situation. But it also gave me the leverage I needed to turn the tables completely. As the cruise ship pulled back into Fort Lauderdale, I was no longer the excluded family member begging for acceptance. I was someone with crucial information that could save my family from financial ruin while exposing the people who had manipulated them. The real question now was how to use this information strategically to not only solve the immediate crisis, but also establish new boundaries and expectations for how my family treated me going forward. Excluded from my cousin's wedding to avoid drama, I took a vacation. When the wedding turned into I flew back to Ohio on a Sunday morning, feeling like a different person than the one who had left for the cruise 10 days earlier. The man who had been excluded from his cousin's wedding and dismissed by his family was returning with information that would change everything. I had scheduled a family meeting for that evening at my parents' house, telling them only that I had reviewed their situation and was prepared to discuss solutions. I arrived at my childhood home on Maple Street to find cars filling the driveway and lining the curb. Everyone was there. Mom, Dad, Aunt Margaret, Uncle Robert, Jessica, Brandon, and even my cousin Michael, who had driven down from Cleveland. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful, everyone clearly expecting me to open my checkbook and make their problems disappear. Travis. Mom greeted me with an unusually warm hug. "How was the rest of your vacation? We're so grateful you're willing to help the family through this crisis." I accepted hugs and greetings from everyone, noting how differently they were treating me compared to the phone call where I had been uninvited from the wedding. Amazing how quickly family dynamics changed when someone needed money. Before we talk about financial solutions, I said, settling into Dad's recliner, I want everyone to understand exactly what happened at Jessica's wedding. I spent several days investigating the venue fire, and what I discovered is going to shock all of you. Uncle Robert looked confused. "Travis, we know what happened. The electrical system was overloaded and caused a fire. It was an accident." "It wasn't an accident, Uncle Robert. It was a planned insurance fraud scheme orchestrated by Sarah and Derek Wellington." The room went completely silent. Jessica's face went pale, and Brandon reached for her hand instinctively. Aunt Margaret looked like I had slapped her. "That's a serious accusation," Dad said carefully. "What evidence do you have?" I opened my laptop and connected it to their television, displaying the timeline I had created during the cruise. First, let's talk about the venue itself. Derek took photos of the electrical panel during the wedding planning phase. His construction background would have immediately identified the outdated and dangerous wiring. The venue had been cited twice in the past 18 months for electrical violations that were never corrected. I showed them the fire marshal's reports that Tony had obtained, pointing out the specific citations and recommendations that had been ignored. Derek knew this venue was a fire waiting to happen, but Sarah was the one who insisted on this venue. Jessica said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I wanted to use the country club where Brandon's parents had their anniversary party, but Sarah convinced me this place was more elegant and photogenic." Exactly. And here's why she pushed for this specific location. I displayed the phone records showing Sarah's consultations with personal injury lawyers. 3 weeks before your wedding, Sarah contacted multiple law firms specializing in venue liability and insurance claims. She wasn't planning your wedding, Jessica. She was planning a lawsuit. The evidence kept mounting as I walked them through Derek's history of insurance claims, On his properties, the venue's failure to provide required electrical capacity documentation, and the suspicious timing of Sarah and Derek's departure immediately after the fire. They planned this entire scenario. I continued. Choose a venue with known electrical problems, load it with enough equipment to guarantee an overload, collect insurance money from the inevitable fire, and leave you to deal with the immediate costs, while they pursued legal settlements. Brandon was the first to speak, his voice shaking with anger. You're telling me that Derek sabotaged our wedding for money, that they deliberately put our guests at risk for an insurance scam. That's exactly what I'm telling you. And the reason I was excluded from the wedding wasn't to avoid drama between Sarah and me. It was because Derek was worried I might recognize the venue setup as dangerous. My event planning background would have made me question the electrical capacity for all the vendor equipment. Aunt Margaret pressed her hands to her face. Oh my God. We excluded you to protect the people who were planning to destroy Jessica's wedding. How could we have been so blind? Because Sarah is very good at manipulation, and she played on your desire to avoid conflict. She convinced you that I was a potential problem while positioning herself as someone working hard for Jessica's benefit. Uncle Robert stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. What do we do now? Can we prove this? Can we hold them responsible? Yes, we can. And here's how we're going to handle it. I closed the laptop and looked around the room at my family members. I'm willing to help resolve this crisis, but it's going to be under my terms, using my professional expertise, and with full acknowledgement of how badly you all handled this situation. What are your conditions? Dad asked. First, I want written apologies from each of you acknowledging that excluding me from Jessica's wedding was wrong and hurtful. Not just verbal apologies, but actual letters that recognize the specific ways you failed me as family members. Jessica nodded immediately. Travis, you deserve much more than an apology, but yes, absolutely. Second, I'm taking complete control of the legal and financial response to this crisis. You're going to trust my judgment about lawyers' insurance claims and strategy. No more family committee decisions that prioritize keeping peace over doing what's right. That's fair, Brandon said. You clearly understand this situation better than any of us. Third, we're going to expose Sarah and Derek's fraud publicly and pursue criminal charges. I don't want them to just pay restitution quietly. I want everyone to know what they did. Mom looked uncomfortable. Travis, do we really need to make this public? What if it reflects poorly on the family? Mom, they committed crimes that could have killed people. That fire put 60 wedding guests at risk. This isn't about family embarrassment. It's about justice and preventing them from doing this to other people. You're right, Uncle Robert said firmly. I was so focused on the money that I wasn't thinking about the bigger picture. They need to face consequences. Fourth, when this is resolved, I want formal recognition that my professional expertise is valuable to this family. No more dismissing my opinions or excluding me from important decisions because someone else might be uncomfortable. Travis. Aunt Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. We should have valued your knowledge and your presence all along. We treated you terribly, and I'm ashamed of how blind we were. And finally, I want to establish clear boundaries about how this family handles conflicts going forward. No more excluding people to avoid imaginary drama. No more prioritizing outsiders' comfort over family loyalty. And absolutely, no more sharing my personal financial information with people outside the family. The room was quiet as everyone processed my conditions. Finally, Jessica spoke up. Travis, everything you're asking for is completely reasonable. We owe you all of that and more. But can you actually get us out of this financial mess? I smiled for the first time since arriving. Jessica, not only can I get you out of this mess, but by the time I'm done, Derek and Sarah are going to pay you enough money to fund your honeymoon and put a down payment on a house. They picked the wrong family to defraud. How is that possible? Brandon asked. Because I have evidence of their premeditated fraud, their criminal conspiracy, and their reckless endangerment of wedding guests. With the right legal strategy, we can pursue both criminal charges and civil damages. They're not just going to reimburse the venue costs. They're going to pay punitive damages that will make this the most expensive insurance scam they ever attempted. Uncle Robert sat back down, looking relieved for the first time in weeks. Travis, I don't know how to thank you. After how we treated you, you have every right to walk away and let us handle this mess ourselves. Uncle Robert, your family. I'm angry about how I was treated, but I'm not going to let Jessica and Brandon's future be destroyed by criminals who manipulated all of you. We're going to fix this, but we're going to do it the right way, with full accountability for everyone involved. As the meeting ended and family members prepared to leave, Jessica pulled me aside. Travis, I know my apology letter won't undo the hurt we caused you, but I want you to know that this experience has taught me who in this family I can really count on. I'll never make the mistake of excluding you again. Jess, the important thing now is making sure Derek and Sarah face consequences for what they did. They nearly destroyed your marriage before it even got started, and they put people's lives at risk. That's not something we can forgive or forget. What happens next? Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with the prosecutor's office to present evidence of criminal fraud. By the end of the week, Derek and Sarah are going to discover that their insurance scam has turned into the biggest mistake of their lives. For the first time in weeks, Jessica smiled genuinely. I'm so glad you're on our side, Travis. I forgot how formidable you can be when someone threatens your family. As I drove home that evening, I felt a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with money or revenge. My family had finally recognized my value beyond my inheritance, and I was about to use my professional skills to deliver justice that would protect other people from Derek and Sarah's criminal schemes. The excluded family member was about to become the family hero, and Sarah and Derek were about to learn that some people fight back harder than they ever expected. Monday morning, I walked into the Franklin County Prosecutor's office with a briefcase full of evidence and a determination to see justice served. I had called ahead and arranged a meeting with Assistant District Attorney Linda Morrison, who specialized in insurance fraud cases. Linda had prosecuted several high-profile fraud schemes, and her reputation for thorough investigation made her perfect for this case. Mr. Travis. Linda greeted me in her downtown Columbus office. You mentioned on the phone that you have evidence of insurance fraud related to a wedding venue fire. Tell me what you've discovered. I spent the next hour walking Linda through the timeline, the evidence of premeditation, Derek's history of insurance claims, and Sarah's consultations with personal injury lawyers. Linda took detailed notes occasionally, asking clarifying questions about sources and documentation. This is substantial evidence, she said finally. The pattern of behavior, the prior venue violations, the legal consultations before the incident. It all points to conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. But I want to make sure we have enough to prove intent beyond reasonable doubt. What additional evidence would strengthen the case? Recorded conversations would be ideal, but those are hard to obtain legally. However, if Derek and Sarah believe they've gotten away with this scheme, they might incriminate themselves if approached by someone they trust. Linda's suggestion sparked an idea. Jessica still had Derek's phone number from when they had dated, and Sarah might be willing to talk if she thought the family was just trying to understand what happened. Would conversations recorded by family members be admissible? In Ohio, as long as one party to the conversation consents to recording, it's legal. If your cousin were to call Derek asking questions about the fire, and he made incriminating statements that could be very useful evidence. I called Jessica immediately after leaving the prosecutor's office. Jess, I need you to help gather more evidence against Derek and Sarah. Are you willing to make some phone calls that might be recorded? JT, absolutely. What do you need me to do? Call Derek and tell him you're trying to understand what happened at the wedding. Act confused and ask him about the venue, the electrical setup, anything that might get him talking. Don't accuse him of anything. Just sound like you're seeking closure. Jessica made the call that afternoon from my office, with the conversation being recorded on a device Linda had recommended. Derek's responses were more revealing than we had hoped. Jessica, honestly, I tried to warn Sarah that venue looked sketchy. Derek said, his voice clearly audible on the recording. The electrical panel was ancient, and I could see they had way too much stuff plugged in. I told her someone should mention it to you, but she said it wasn't our place to interfere with your planning. You noticed electrical problems before the fire. Anyone with construction experience would have seen it. That place was an accident waiting to happen. I actually took pictures of the setup because I was worried about liability if something went wrong. Jessica's acting was perfect. Concerned, but not accusatory. Do you think we should have hired an electrician to check things? Probably. But honestly, I figured the venue's insurance would cover any problems. These old places usually have good liability coverage specifically because they know their systems are outdated. Derek had just admitted on tape that he recognized the electrical dangers, took photos for liability purposes, and expected insurance coverage for predictable problems. It was nearly a complete confession to premeditated fraud. The call with Sarah was even more damaging. When Jessica asked about the venue selection process, Sarah became defensive and revealed crucial information. Jessica, I researched that venue thoroughly before recommending it. I knew about the electrical limitations, but I also knew they had comprehensive liability insurance. I figured if anything went wrong, you'd be protected financially and might even come out ahead. What do you mean, come out ahead? Well, venue liability cases often result in settlements that exceed the actual damages. I consulted with some lawyers about venue responsibility, and they said guests can sometimes collect significant compensation for trauma and inconvenience. Sarah had just admitted on tape that she deliberately chose a dangerous venue, knowing about insurance implications, and had consulted lawyers about potential settlements before the wedding ever took place. Armed with these recorded confessions, Linda moved quickly to file criminal charges. Derek Wellington and Sarah Martinez were arrested on Wednesday morning on charges of conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, reckless endangerment, and criminal mischief. The arrest warrants cited their recorded admissions and the extensive evidence of premeditation. The local media picked up the story immediately. Wedding venue fire revealed as insurance fraud scheme, read the headline in the Columbus Dispatch. The article detailed how the couple had deliberately endangered wedding guests for financial gain, and how their scheme had been exposed by the bride's cousin, who was excluded from the wedding. But the real vindication came when Linda called me Thursday afternoon with an update that exceeded my best expectations. Travis, Derek, and Sarah's lawyers want to negotiate a plea deal. They're facing felony charges that could result in 5 to 10 years in prison each. They're prepared to make full restitution and pay significant damages to avoid trial. What kind of numbers are we talking about? They've offered to pay the full $300,000 in venue damages, plus an additional $150,000 in punitive damages to Jessica and Brandon for emotional distress and endangerment. Total settlement of $450,000. I felt a rush of satisfaction that was difficult to contain. Not only would Jessica and Brandon avoid bankruptcy, but they would receive enough money to start their marriage on solid financial ground. And the criminal charges. They'll plead guilty to reduced charges, insurance fraud, and reckless endangerment. Derek will serve 18 months in minimum security prison. Sarah will serve 1 year. They'll also be placed on probation for 5 years and banned from purchasing insurance policies on any properties they don't personally occupy. The plea agreement was finalized on Friday, exactly 2 weeks after the wedding venue fire. Local news stations covered the settlement with several reporters wanting to interview me about how the fraud was discovered. I agreed to a brief interview with Channel 10 News. Mr. Travis, the reporter asked, how did you uncover this elaborate scheme when investigators initially believed the fire was accidental? My background in event planning made me suspicious when I learned about the electrical problems. Venues are required to disclose electrical limitations, and this venue failed to do that. Once I started investigating, the pattern of deliberate choices became obvious. You were excluded from this wedding, but you still helped your family seek justice. How do you feel about that irony? Sometimes the people who try to push you away are exactly the people who need your help the most. I'm glad I could use my professional expertise to protect my family and prevent Derek and Sarah from victimizing other people with similar schemes. The news coverage brought unexpected benefits to my event planning business. Within days of the broadcast, I received calls from 3 potential corporate clients who had seen the interview. My reputation as someone who could investigate vendor problems and protect clients from fraud became a significant business advantage. But the most meaningful vindication came from my family's response to the resolution. Uncle Robert called to tell me that watching me handle the legal strategy had opened his eyes to expertise he had never recognized before. Travis, I always thought of you as my nephew who planned parties. I didn't realize you had the knowledge and skills to take on criminals and win. The family owes you more than an apology. We owe you our respect. Jessica and Brandon used part of their settlement money to book a honeymoon cruise to Alaska, something they never could have afforded before the windfall. Jessica called me before they left. Travis, I know this sounds weird, but in some ways, Derek and Sarah's fraud scheme turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to our marriage. We learned who in the family we can really count on. We started our marriage debt-free with money in the bank. And most importantly, we learned to value the right people for the right reasons. I'm just glad everything worked out, Jess. More than worked out. Brandon and I want you to plan our first anniversary party next year. And this time, you'll be the guest of honor, not someone we're worried about excluding. As I hung up the phone in my downtown Columbus office, looking out at the city skyline, I reflected on how completely the situation had reversed. 3 weeks earlier, I had been excluded from a family wedding and dismissed as a potential troublemaker. Now, I was being praised as the family hero who had delivered justice and financial security through professional expertise and determination. Sarah and Derek had gambled that they could manipulate my family and profit from their deception. Instead, their scheme had cost them their freedom, their reputations, and nearly $500,000 in restitution and damages. Sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who defeat you most completely. 6 months later, I stood in the backyard of my parents' house on Maple Street, watching my family celebrate Jessica and Brandon's housewarming party. The young couple had used their settlement money to purchase a beautiful 3-bedroom home in Upper Arlington, and they had specifically asked me to plan the celebration. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the man who had been excluded from their wedding was now organizing their next major life milestone. The party was everything Jessica's original wedding reception should have been. Elegant decorations, perfect weather, delicious food, and most importantly, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about the couple's happiness. I had coordinated with local vendors I trusted, ensuring that every electrical requirement was properly documented and safely managed. No detail was left to chance. Travis. Aunt Margaret approached me as I supervised the caterer's setup. I wanted to give you something. She handed me an envelope with my name written in her careful handwriting. It's my formal written apology like you requested, but it's also something more. I opened the envelope to find a 2-page letter acknowledging her mistakes, but also containing a heartfelt reflection on how the wedding crisis had changed her perspective on family relationships. Margaret, you didn't need to write anything beyond what I asked for. Yes, I did. Travis, watching you handle Derek and Sarah's legal case taught me things about you that I should have recognized years ago. You have wisdom, integrity, and professional skills that this family should have been celebrating instead of taking for granted. I'm ashamed that it took a crisis for me to see your true value. Similar conversations happened throughout the evening. Uncle Robert pulled me aside to tell me he had recommended my event planning services to 3 business associates, resulting in lucrative corporate contracts. My parents presented me with a framed photo from the housewarming party, with an inscription thanking me for showing us what family loyalty really means. But the most meaningful moment came when Brandon asked me to join him and Jessica for a private conversation in their new living room. Travis, we need to tell you something that we've never said directly, Brandon began. Derek and Sarah's scheme didn't just threaten our finances, it could have killed people. That electrical fire happened during dinner service with 60 guests in the room. If the blaze had spread faster, or if people had panicked during evacuation, we could have been planning funerals instead of a housewarming party. Jessica nodded, her eyes serious. When we realized they had deliberately endangered our friends and family for money, it changed how we think about everything. They weren't just stealing from us. They were willing to risk people's lives for an insurance payout. The investigation revealed that Derek had calculated the maximum occupancy and electrical load to ensure an overload without necessarily causing casualties. I added, he wanted a fire big enough to trigger insurance claims, but controlled enough to avoid murder charges. It was sociopathic in its calculation, which is why your investigation was so important, Brandon continued. You didn't just save our finances. You prevented Derek and Sarah from hurting other people. The prosecutor told us they were already researching venues for their next scheme when they were arrested. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, I found myself sitting on the back porch with Jessica and my parents watching the last of the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Dad, do you remember when you used to tell me that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who teach us the most about ourselves? Dad nodded thoughtfully. I said that when you were going through your divorce from Sarah. I didn't expect it to apply to family relationships too. This whole experience taught me that family loyalty isn't automatic. It's earned through how we treat each other during difficult times. When you excluded me from the wedding, it hurt deeply because I had always prioritized family relationships. But it also forced me to recognize my own worth independent of family validation. And we learned that we were prioritizing harmony over honesty, Mom added. We were so worried about avoiding conflict that we made terrible decisions about who to trust and who to exclude. Jessica leaned back in her chair, looking peaceful, in a way I hadn't seen since before her original engagement to Derek 2 years earlier. You know what's funny? If Derek hadn't cheated on me originally, I never would have become close to Travis during my recovery. And if Sarah and Derek hadn't orchestrated this fraud scheme, we never would have discovered how much we needed Travis's expertise and support. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the most important revelations. As I drove home that night, I thought about the life lesson that had emerged from this painful but ultimately transformative experience. Families often hurt each other most when they're trying to avoid being hurt. My family excluded me because they were afraid of conflict, not realizing that excluding loyal family members creates far more damage than any potential awkwardness they were trying to prevent. The real lesson wasn't about forgiveness or loyalty, though both were important. The real lesson was about recognizing value in the people closest to us, before crisis forces that recognition. My family had always seen me as Travis who plans parties, not Travis who has professional expertise that could solve serious problems. It took a criminal fraud scheme for them to understand the difference. But perhaps the most important insight was about how we respond when people underestimate us. Sarah and Derek had counted on me being the excluded hurt family member who would stay away and let them execute their scheme without interference. Instead, I used my exclusion as motivation to investigate and expose their crimes. Sometimes the people who dismiss us give us the greatest opportunities to prove our strength. I also learned something about my own resilience. Being excluded from Jessica's wedding had felt devastating in the moment, but it had also freed me to take the cruise that provided emotional distance and perspective. If I had been at the wedding, I might have been caught up in the immediate crisis and missed the opportunity to step back and analyze the situation strategically. The experience reinforced my belief that people who try to manipulate and control others through deception eventually face consequences for their choices. Derek and Sarah thought they were clever enough to orchestrate an insurance fraud without getting caught. Instead, their scheme had cost them their freedom, their financial security, and their reputations in the community. As I pulled into my driveway, I checked my phone to find a text message from Jessica. Thank you for everything, Travis. You saved our marriage, our finances, and our faith in family. Brandon and I will spend the rest of our lives making sure you know how much you mean to us. I smiled, feeling a sense of completion that had nothing to do with money or legal victories. My family had learned to value what really mattered, and I had learned that my worth wasn't dependent on their recognition. The wedding I was excluded from had become the crisis that brought us all closer together in the most unexpected way. Sometimes the most painful family experiences teach us the most valuable lessons about loyalty, forgiveness, and the real meaning of unconditional love. But perhaps, more importantly, they teach us that our strength and value don't disappear when others fail to recognize them. True family bonds are built on mutual respect, honest communication, and the willingness to fight for each other when it matters most. The greatest gift my family gave me wasn't their apology or their gratitude. It was the opportunity to discover that I didn't need their validation to know my own worth, and that real love means standing up for what's right, even when people have hurt you. Have you ever been excluded from a family event, only to later realize it was the best thing that could have happened? Sometimes the most painful rejections lead to the most important discoveries about our own strength and the people who truly matter in our lives. Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you've turned family challenges into opportunities for growth. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and finding strength in unexpected places. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that being underestimated can be the first step toward proving your true value. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the people who try to exclude you are giving you the greatest gift possible, the chance to discover just how strong and capable you really are. Keep fighting for what's right, and never let anyone convince you that your worth depends on their approval.